The cold evening wind swept across the small village, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. A solitary hut stood at the edge of the village, made of worn wood and patched tin, appearing fragile against the sprawling fields beyond. Outside, a woman sat on the creaking wooden steps, her frame hunched, holding a small child close to her chest. The child, no more than 7 years old, shivered slightly, his tiny hands clutching the threadbare blanket that barely kept him warm. The woman, Miriam, looked worn beyond her years. Her eyes, large and dark, reflected a combination of fear, desperation, and determination. She had been through hardships she never imagined she could survive. But nothing felt as urgent or as heart-wrenching as tonight. Tonight, her son Ali needed her more than ever. Ali's 7th birthday had arrived, a day that should have been filled with laughter, candles, and warmth. Instead, the hut was cold, empty and silent, except for the soft whimpers of a sick child. Miriam's heart ached as she brushed back his tousled hair and pressed a kiss to his fevered forehead. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she could possibly do. The local doctor would not come without a responsible adult present, someone recognized as the child's guardian. And Miriam, a poor widowed mother with no husband, faced a cruel reality. There was no one else to step in. In the distance, the rhythmic sound of horse hooves echoed across the field, growing steadily louder. A tall figure appeared, riding with a quiet authority. Kamran, a rancher known for his strong presence and reserved nature, slowly approached. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust as he neared the hut. He had seen Miriam from afar, known of her struggles, and yet the world around him always felt distant and unyielding. Miriam's heart leapt at the sight of him, but fear and pride made her hesitate. She could not afford rejection, not tonight. Not when her son's life hung in the balance. With a trembling voice and eyes full of silent pleading, she whispered words she never thought she would say aloud. The words were desperate, raw, and frightening even to her own ears, yet they carried hope. The only hope she had left for her child's survival. Cameron dismounted slowly, the leather of his boots creaking as they touched the uneven ground. His eyes, sharp yet calm, swept over the small hut and the fragile figure of Miriam clutching her son. There was an unspoken understanding in that gaze. He knew something was wrong, but the exact depth of her desperation wasn't immediately clear. Miriam swallowed hard, her throat dry, and her hands shook as she held Ali closer to her chest. The child's feverish eyes flickered between her and the approaching man, sensing the weight of the moment. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to speak, knowing that words alone might determine the fate of her son tonight. "Cameron," she began, her voice barely audible over the whisper of the wind through the fields. She paused, gathering courage, then leaned closer, as if the words themselves might escape the safety of her lips. "Please, don't be angry. I know it's strange, but I have no one else. Just for tonight. Will you be my husband?" The words fell into the evening air, fragile and trembling. Cameron froze. He had expected fear, pleading, maybe even tears, but never this. The raw, desperate vulnerability in her voice, the sheer intensity of her need. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came immediately. Miriam's eyes glistened with tears, and she quickly added, her voice quivering with urgency, "Ali, he's sick. The doctor won't come unless someone is here, someone he can trust. Please, I beg you. Just for tonight. I have no other choice." Cameron's expression softened. He looked at Ali, whose small body was curled against his mother, shivering with fever and exhaustion. The child's trust, though innocent, seemed to plead with him silently. Something stirred deep within Cameron, a mixture of compassion, protectiveness, and an inexplicable pull toward this woman and her child. He took a slow step forward, bending slightly so his eyes met Miriam's. "All right," he said quietly, almost reluctantly, but with a firmness that carried reassurance. "Just for tonight, I'll be your husband." Relief flooded Miriam's face, tears spilling freely now. As she whispered a heartfelt, almost inaudible, "Thank you," Ali stirred slightly, sensing a calm presence beside him. The cold wind outside seemed to fade, replaced by the fragile warmth of hope. In that moment, nothing else mattered, just a mother, her child, and a man willing to step in, even if only for a single night. The small hut was dimly lit, shadows flickering across the walls as Cameron settled himself on a creaking wooden stool. Miriam moved quietly, fetching a small, battered pot and lighting the last remaining candles. The warm glow illuminated her face, streaked with tears and exhaustion, yet her eyes held a fragile spark of hope. For the first time that evening, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease ever so slightly. Ali lay curled up under the thin blanket, his fever still high, but the presence of Cameron seemed to soothe him. The boy's small hand reached instinctively for Miriam's, then paused, sensing the man sitting nearby. Cameron watched Ali with quiet attentiveness, his normally stern expression softening as he observed the child's fragile state. There was no pretense in the moment, just the stark reality of a sick boy, his desperate mother, and a man unexpectedly drawn into their fragile world. Miriam began preparing a simple meal, her hands moving almost mechanically. The aroma of warm bread and simmering soup filled the air. Cameron, noticing her weariness, stepped forward. "Let me help," he said gently, reaching for a pot. His hands were steady and strong, the contrast of his presence against the frailty of their situation striking. Miriam hesitated, then nodded, grateful yet slightly embarrassed by the unexpected kindness. As they worked side by side, the silence between them was not uncomfortable. Instead, it was filled with an unspoken understanding. Cameron offered small smiles and quiet reassurances, while Miriam allowed herself the rare luxury of a tentative laugh. Ali stirred, looking up with sleepy eyes, and whispered, "Abu?" The word awkward but hopeful. Cameron's heart melted. He knelt beside the boy, gently taking his small hand. "Yes, little one. I'm here," he said softly. Ali's lips curled into a faint smile, and Miriam felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't known in years. That night, the hut felt less cold. For the first time, the oppressive weight of hopelessness lifted, replaced by a fragile warmth that promised safety, even if temporary. Cameron, Miriam, and Ali sat together in quiet companionship, each aware of the boundaries yet comforted by the shared presence. It was a night of small gestures, hands held, soft whispers, quiet laughter that wove the first delicate threads of connection and trust between them. By the time Ali drifted into a peaceful sleep, Miriam dared to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible kindness of a stranger could turn into something more lasting. The first light of dawn crept through the small, cracked window of the hut, casting a soft golden glow over the worn wooden floor. The night's quiet had been broken only by the faint sounds of Ali's soft breathing and the occasional creak of the hut settling. For Miriam, sleep had been brief and restless, her mind swirling with worry for her son and the unexpected kindness of Cameron. Ali stirred, his fever slightly diminished, and opened his sleepy eyes. When he saw Cameron sitting quietly nearby, watching over him with careful attention, he whispered, "Abu?" A question half awake, half hopeful. Cameron leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "Yes, little one. I'm here. I won't go anywhere," he said softly, the words carrying a weight of promise far beyond the night. Miriam watched them with a mixture of relief and awe. She could not believe that this strong, silent man, someone she had never imagined would step into her fragile world, had spent the night watching over her child and protecting them both. Her heart swelled with gratitude, but also with the quiet, tentative spark of something more. She knew the truth. Kamran's presence had been more than help. It had been a lifeline. The sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of the doctor. Miriam felt a pang of anxiety, worrying that the delicate balance of the night would be disrupted. But when the doctor entered and saw Cameron sitting there, he simply nodded, accepting him as the responsible adult needed to oversee Ali's care. There were no questions, no judgment, only recognition that a child's life was being safeguarded. As the doctor began his work, Miriam turned to Cameron, her voice trembling but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, truly. You've done more than I could ever ask. Now, you can go if you wish." Cameron paused at the doorway, looking back at the small family. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "Go?" he murmured. "I never left. I'm not going anywhere, Miriam. If you allow me, I'll stay, not just tonight, but as long as you need me." Miriam's eyes widened, tears spilling over. Ali, sensing the shift in the air, reached out for Cameron's hand. In that moment, the hut felt warmer, the morning brighter, and the impossible had transformed into hope. The stranger who had become a protector, the desperate plea that had seemed so audacious, had created a new beginning, a night that turned into a lifetime of possibilities. And though the day had just begun, Miriam dared to believe that their lives would never be the same again.